The mist clung to the cemetery like a shroud, weaving between weathered headstones as Martin leaned on his shovel. For 15 years, he'd been a caretaker of Oakwood's dead, knowing each plot better than the living remembered them. That's why the woman caught his attention. Third time this week, leaving colorful toys at the unmarked grave in the far corner. No name, no dates, just fresh flowers and now a small teddy bear with a blue ribbon. Martin knew what lay beneath that soil, a truth that would shatter her world completely. Don't forget to subscribe to hear what happens next in this haunting mystery. The cemetery had been Martin's sanctuary since the accident 15 years ago. Tending to the dead was simpler than facing the living, especially after what happened with his own family. As the official gravedigger and groundskeeper of Oakwood Cemetery, he kept meticulous records of every soul laid to rest under his watch. The townspeople respected his work but kept their distance, whispering about the quiet man who spoke more to headstones than neighbors. Martin's calloused hands bore the marks of countless graves dug, but it was the invisible scars that truly defined him. The weight of secrets pressed down on his shoulders more heavily than any coffin he'd ever lowered. He'd been working at Oakwood when they buried the child in that unmarked grave, the one the woman visited. He remembered that rainy afternoon all too clearly, how the small casket had seemed impossibly light. All he wanted now was peace, to maintain the grounds, honor the dead, and avoid the complications of the living. But the woman with her toys and flowers had disrupted that careful balance. Talking to the dead again, Martin? The sharp voice of Mayor Blackwood cut through the morning fog. The mayor stood at the cemetery gates, his expensive suit out of place among the weathered stones. Behind him, several town council members exchanged knowing glances. "Some of us have work to do," Martin muttered, turning back to his rake. "Yes, well about that." Blackwood's voice carried across the grounds. "The council and I were discussing the old section, specifically that unmarked plot the Carson woman keeps visiting." Martin froze. The Carson woman? So that's who she was. "We're thinking of redeveloping that section," Blackwood continued, loud enough for his entourage to hear. "Can't have valuable land wasted on anonymous graves, especially with that new memorial garden project." The council members nodded approvingly as Blackwood added with a smirk. "Unless, of course, you know something about that plot we don't? Something worth sharing with Mrs. Carson, perhaps?" Heat rose in Martin's face as the group chuckled. They had no idea what truth lay buried there, or what it would do to Mrs. Carson when she learned it. The mayor's words hung in the air like a threat as he and the council members departed, leaving Martin alone with his thoughts and the persistent mist. He stabbed his shovel into the soft earth, knuckles white around the handle. Blackwood knew something, or suspected enough to make Martin's life difficult. Later that afternoon, Martin spotted Mrs. Carson approaching the unmarked grave, this time with a small wooden train painted in primary colors. She knelt, arranging it carefully beside the teddy bear, her fingers lingering on the toys as if they might somehow reach beyond the veil. Martin ducked behind a nearby mausoleum, watching her whisper words he couldn't hear to someone who couldn't answer. The next morning, Mayor Blackwood returned, this time alone. He found Martin clearing fallen leaves from a row of veterans' graves. "I've been looking into some old records," Blackwood said, examining his manicured fingernails. "Interesting things happen in small towns, don't they? Especially 15 years ago." Martin continued working, refusing to meet the mayor's gaze. "The council's approved the redevelopment plan," Blackwood continued. "We'll start with that unmarked section next month. Unless there's a compelling reason not to." He paused, watching Martin's reaction. Perhaps Mrs. Carson should be informed about whose grave she's been visiting. Wouldn't that be the decent thing to do? "Leave her be," Martin muttered, his voice barely audible. "What was that?" "Speak up, Gravedigger. Not everyone whispers to the dead like you do." Martin straightened, facing Blackwood directly. "I said leave her be." The mayor's smile turned predatory. "I'm afraid that's not an option anymore. Either you tell her, or I will. And my version might include certain details about your employment history." 3 days later, Martin found himself cornered at the cemetery's annual memorial service. Blackwood had orchestrated a perfect ambush, steering Mrs. Carson directly toward him while a cluster of council members and prominent citizens looked on. "Martin here was just about to explain something about that special grave you visit," Blackwood announced loudly, silencing nearby conversations. "Weren't you, Martin?" Mrs. Carson's eyes, hazel, rimmed with the permanent redness of grief, fixed on Martin's face. "You know something about that grave? Her voice trembled with desperate hope. The crowd had grown silent, watching the drama unfold. Martin saw Blackwood's satisfied smirk, the council members' eager expressions, Mrs. Carson's vulnerable anticipation. Martin began, but Blackwood interrupted. Martin was working here when that burial happened. Weren't you, Martin? In fact, I believe you dug that very grave. Blackwood's voice carried across the gathering. Strange that you've never mentioned it to Mrs. Carson during her many visits. Mrs. Carson's expression shifted from hope to confusion. Is this true? Martin felt the weight of every stare, the judgment in their eyes. The secret he'd carried for 15 years pressed against his chest like a stone. Yes, he admitted quietly. I dug that grave. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Blackwood's smile widened. That evening, after everyone had gone, Martin retreated to the small office behind the cemetery chapel. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his ancient filing cabinet and removed a worn leather journal. Not the official cemetery records that anyone could request, but his personal documentation of every burial he'd overseen. Each entry contained details never recorded in official documents: weather conditions, unusual circumstances, private words spoken by mourners, and secrets the dead had taken with them. Martin's fingers, rough from years of working the earth, moved with surprising delicacy as he turned to an entry from 15 years ago. His handwriting was meticulous, his observations detailed and precise. Before becoming a gravedigger, Martin had been something else entirely, something that had given him an eye for details others missed, and the ability to recognize connections hidden from ordinary observers. He knew exactly what lay in that unmarked grave, and now he would have to tell Mrs. Carson the truth. From the shadows of a black sedan parked beyond the cemetery gates, Senator Hargrove observed the confrontation through tinted windows. He lifted a phone to his ear and whispered, "The gravedigger's talking." Contain this immediately. Martin sat alone in his office as night descended over the cemetery, the leather journal open before him. The pages chronicled 15 years of secrets, including the truth about the nameless grave that Mrs. Carson visited faithfully. Tomorrow, he would have to tell her everything. His fingers traced the entry from that rainy April night. Few people knew that before becoming a gravedigger, Martin had been a forensic investigator with the State Bureau. His career had ended abruptly after he'd uncovered evidence implicating several powerful figures in a corruption scandal. The case had been buried, much like the bodies he now tended, and Martin had been quietly forced into early retirement with a thinly veiled threat: disappear or face consequences. He'd chosen the cemetery in this small town precisely because it seemed far removed from his past life. Yet somehow the past had found him again. Martin closed the journal and reached for the bottom drawer, pushing aside folders until his fingers found the false bottom. He removed a small digital recorder and a USB drive he hadn't touched in years. His insurance policy, evidence he'd secretly preserved before his dismissal. Time to remember who I was, he murmured. The next morning, Martin arrived at the cemetery earlier than usual. He'd spent the night reviewing old files and connecting dots that had eluded him 15 years ago. The picture that emerged was disturbing but clear. Mayor Blackwood had been involved in the same corruption case that had ended Martin's career, though as a minor player. And Senator Hargrove, whose name Martin had spotted on recent cemetery donation records, had been at the center of it all. Martin was setting up for routine maintenance when he noticed a black sedan parked just outside the cemetery gates. The same one he'd spotted yesterday. He pretended not to notice as he went about his work, but his senses, once honed for investigation, were fully alert. At precisely 10 o'clock, Mrs. Carson arrived with her customary bouquet of white lilies. Martin watched as she made her way to the unmarked grave, her shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. He waited until she had placed the flowers and stepped back before approaching. "Mrs. Carson," he said gently. She turned, surprise flickering across her face. "Martin, I didn't expect to see you here this morning. I need to speak with you," he said. "About this grave." Her eyes widened. "You know who's buried here?" "Yes." Martin took a deep breath. "But first, I need to show you something. Would you mind coming to my office?" In the small office behind a chapel, Martin carefully laid out several documents on his desk. Mrs. Carson sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. 15 years ago, Martin began, I wasn't a gravedigger. I was a forensic investigator working on a case involving political corruption and money laundering. During that investigation, we discovered that certain officials were using a charity foundation as a front to move illegal funds. Mrs. Carson frowned. I don't understand what this has to do with. The foundation was called New Horizons, Martin continued. It supposedly helped troubled youth. Your son volunteered there, didn't he? Her breath caught. Yes. Jason worked there after school. He believed in what they were doing. Her voice trembled. Before he disappeared, Martin nodded. Jason didn't just volunteer. I believe he discovered something about the foundation's real purpose. And I think that's why he vanished. He slid a photograph across the desk, a group of young men standing outside a building with New Horizons emblazoned above the door. In the background, partially obscured but recognizable, was a younger Mayor Blackwood speaking with a distinguished man. That's Senator Hargrove, Martin explained. He was the foundation's primary benefactor. And this, he pointed to a young man at the edge of the photo. Is your son, isn't it? Mrs. Carson's fingers trembled as she touched the image. Yes, that's Jason. 3 weeks after this photo was taken, Jason disappeared. The police investigation concluded he'd likely run away. A month later, I was called to examine an unidentified body found in the river 50 miles downstream. Male, approximately 20 years old. Mrs. Carson's face had gone pale. No, they told me there was never any body found. That's why I've never stopped looking. The case was deliberately mishandled, Martin said quietly. My findings were altered in the official report. When I protested, I was forced out of my position. The body was buried here, in this cemetery, in an unmarked grave. Tears streamed down Mrs. Carson's face. Are you telling me that all this time, I've been visiting my son's grave without knowing it? I believe so, Martin said gently. I kept detailed notes of everything, including DNA samples that were never officially processed. With your permission, we could confirm it now. Why? She whispered. Why would they do this? Because Jason knew something. Something that could have exposed them all. Martin leaned forward. Mrs. Carson, do you have any of Jason's belongings from that time? Anything he might have hidden? She wiped her eyes. His room. I've kept it exactly as it was. I could never bear to change it. We need to look there, Martin said. Today. As they left the office, Martin noticed Mayor Blackwood's car pulling into the cemetery. We need to hurry, he murmured, guiding Mrs. Carson toward the side gate. Blackwood intercepted them near the chapel. Mrs. Carson, Martin, he called, his politician's smile firmly in place. I hope our gravedigger has been forthcoming about what he knows. Martin stepped slightly in front of Mrs. Carson. Actually, Mayor, I was just explaining my background in forensic investigation, and how that expertise helped me recognize certain inconsistencies in old cases. Blackwood's smile faltered. Ancient history, I'm sure. Not so ancient, Martin countered. In fact, I was just telling Mrs. Carson about the New Horizons Foundation. You remember it, don't you? You served on the board. The color drained from Blackwood's face. That organization closed years ago. Yes, right after several young men associated with it either disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances. Martin's voice remained calm, but his eyes held Blackwood's with unwavering intensity. Including Mrs. Carson's son, Jason. Blackwood's composure cracked. You're making dangerous accusations, Martin. Based on what? Your discredited theories from a career that ended in disgrace. Based on evidence I preserved, Martin replied. Evidence that connects you, Senator Hargrove, and others to both the financial crimes and the subsequent cover-up. Blackwood stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're a cemetery caretaker. A nobody. Who do you think people will believe? Perhaps the state attorney general, came a voice from behind them. They turned to see an elegant older woman approaching, her silver hair gleaming in the morning light. Judge Eleanor Winters, retired from the bench but still one of the most respected legal minds in the state. Judge Winters, Blackwood stammered. What brings you here? I received some very interesting documents yesterday, she said, nodding slightly to Martin. Anonymous, of course, but compelling enough that I've already spoken with the current Attorney General. He's quite interested in reopening certain investigations. Martin felt a surge of gratitude. He had sent copies of his evidence to Judge Winters, the only person from his past he still trusted, but hadn't been certain she would act on it. Blackwood's face hardened. This is absurd. You can't possibly. Mayor, Judge Winters interrupted. I suggest you contact your attorney." Immediately, as Blackwood retreated to his car, Judge Winters turned to Martin and Mrs. Carson. "I believe you two were leaving. Please, don't let me delay you." In the safety of Mrs. Carson's car, Martin finally allowed himself to breathe. The road ahead would be difficult, but the truth was finally emerging from its unmarked grave. What did you think of this story? Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this mystery unfolding in our quiet cemetery town. The envelope arrived that evening. Photographs of Martin's evidence storage unit, broken into and ransacked. Inside, a single note: "Accident happened to those who dig too deep. Judge Winters was just hospitalized. You're next." Martin's hands trembled as he set down the threatening note. He glanced at Mrs. Carson, who sat across from him in her modest living room, her face ashen under the warm lamplight. "They've gone after Judge Winters," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to move quickly." Mrs. Carson nodded, her grief-hardened resolve showing through. "What do we do now?" Martin paced the worn carpet, mind racing. "I made copies of everything. Multiple sets. The originals are gone, but I have backups hidden in 3 different locations." He paused. "But we need protection. And we need to force their hand before they can silence everyone connected to this." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Callahan. Jack, it's Martin Graves. Pause. The forensic guy who became a gravedigger. Thought you disappeared. I need your help. It's about New Horizons. I have evidence linking Mayor Blackwood and Senator Hargrove to those deaths." Another longer pause. "Jesus, Martin, you've been sitting on this for years. I needed to be certain. And I needed to find someone who would listen." Martin took a deep breath. "Judge Winters has been hospitalized. They're coming after me next." "Where are you?" "Mrs. Carson's house. Jason Carson's mother." "Stay put. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Jack Callahan, now a senior investigative reporter for the state's largest newspaper, arrived in 25. His weathered face showed the years since they'd last worked together, but his eyes retained their sharp intelligence. "Let me see what you've got," he said after introductions. Martin laid out his evidence: financial records showing embezzlement from the New Horizons Foundation, photographs of meetings between Blackwood, Hargrove, and known criminal elements, and most damning, autopsy inconsistencies in the deaths of 3 young men, including Jason Carson. "The medical examiner ruled Jason's death an overdose," Martin explained, "but these toxicology markers don't match typical heroin. It's consistent with a particular designer drug that was being tested at a pharmaceutical company where Hargrove was a major investor." Callahan whistled low. "Human trials without consent. And when they died, they covered it up," Mrs. Carson finished, her voice steady despite the horror. "They buried my son in an unmarked grave and told me he'd run away." Callahan nodded grimly. "This is explosive but dangerous. Blackwood and Hargrove have powerful friends. We need to get this to multiple authorities simultaneously so no single person can bury it." "I have a plan," Martin said, "but it requires us to draw them out, to make them think they've cornered us." By morning, they had set everything in motion. Callahan had secretly contacted trusted colleagues at 3 different news outlets. Martin had arranged for his remaining evidence to be delivered to the state attorney general, the FBI, and a prominent human rights attorney if he didn't check in every 12 hours. The hospital was their chosen battleground. Judge Winters lay in the private wing, ostensibly recovering from a minor stroke. Security cameras monitored the hallways, but Martin knew the hospital's layout intimately. He had buried too many of its patients over the years. "Are you sure about this?" Mrs. Carson asked as they walked through the main entrance, Callahan beside them. Martin nodded. "They'll come. They can't risk Judge Winters regaining consciousness and speaking about what she knows." They took positions in the small waiting area near Judge Winters' room. A nurse Martin had befriended years ago had helped arrange their access, believing they were family friends concerned about the judge. The hours crawled by. Callahan periodically stepped out to make calls, ensuring their safety net remained intact. Mrs. Carson sat quietly, clutching a small toy soldier, one she had placed on her son's grave countless times. At 2:17 a.m., the elevator doors opened. Mayor Blackwood emerged, accompanied by a tall, distinguished man Martin recognized as Senator Hargrove. Behind them loomed two men whose bulky jackets likely concealed weapons. "They're here," Martin whispered. Callahan discreetly activated the recording device in his pocket. Mrs. Carson straightened in her chair, her eyes never leaving the men who had destroyed her son's life. The group approached the nurse's station, where Blackwood flashed his mayoral credentials. The night nurse, not part of their plan, nodded deferentially and buzzed them through the security door. "Now," Martin said. They followed, Martin using his visitor's pass to access the secure wing. They caught up to the group outside Judge Winter's room. "Gentlemen," Martin called out. "Visiting hours ended quite some time ago." Blackwood spun around, his face contorting with rage when he recognized Martin. "You? I warned you to stay out of this." Senator Hargrove stepped forward, his silver hair immaculate even at this late hour. "Mr. Graves, I presume?" The gravedigger with delusions of detective work. "Not delusions, Senator," Martin replied. "Evidence." The same evidence Judge Winters was reviewing before her sudden illness. "Evidence that no longer exists," Blackwood sneered. "That's where you're wrong," Callahan interjected, revealing his press credentials. "Copies are already in the hands of multiple news organizations and law enforcement agencies." Hargrove's composed facade cracked slightly. "Whatever you think you know. I know you tested experimental drugs on vulnerable young men," Martin cut in. "I know when they died, you covered it up. And I know you've been silencing witnesses ever since." One of the bodyguards moved his hand inside his jacket. Martin tensed, but Mrs. Carson stepped forward, placing herself between Martin and the men. "You killed my son," she said, her voice unwavering. "You stole his future, his identity, even his grave." She held up the toy soldier. "I've been leaving these at an unmarked grave for years, never knowing if my son was truly there." Hargrove's expression hardened. "Mrs. Carson, your son was a drug addict who volunteered for a program that might have helped him. His death, while unfortunate, was murder," came a weak voice from behind them. Judge Winters stood in the doorway of her room, pale but upright, supported by a nurse, the same one who had helped Martin. "I've heard everything," she said, "and I've just activated the hospital security protocol. The police are on their way." Blackwood lunged toward the judge, but Martin intercepted him, grappling him to the ground. The bodyguards moved to draw their weapons, but hospital security appeared at both ends of the hallway, weapons raised. "It's over," Martin said, looking up at Senator Hargrove, whose aristocratic features had twisted into a mask of hatred. "You have a choice, Senator," Callahan said, his recorder still running. "Surrender now and cooperate, or fight this and watch everything you've built crumble completely." In the tense silence that followed, Martin locked eyes with Mrs. Carson. After years of tending an anonymous grave, after countless toys left for a son she couldn't properly mourn, justice was finally within reach. The truth, like the bodies Martin had spent years burying, would no longer remain hidden beneath the surface. The hospital corridor fell into a tense silence as police officers flooded in, their radios crackling with static. Senator Hargrove's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly, the first sign of defeat from a man who had spent decades projecting invincibility. "Senator Hargrove, Mayor Blackwood, you're both being detained pending investigation," announced the police captain, a stern-faced woman whose badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Hargrove's attorney materialized seemingly from nowhere, already speaking of misunderstandings and the senator's distinguished record of public service. But the evidence was overwhelming. Judge Winters had preserved her copies of the files, and Callahan's newspaper had already begun publishing the first installments of what would become a Pulitzer-winning expose. As the officers led Hargrove away, he locked eyes with Martin. "You have no idea what you've done," he hissed. "The research we conducted saved thousands. Those men were nothing, street addicts, runaways. They would have died anyway." "They were someone's sons," Martin replied quietly. "They deserve to rest with their names." Mayor Blackwood, always the political survivor, was already distancing himself from Hargrove. "I was misled," he insisted as officers escorted him out. "The senator assured me everything was legal. I was only trying to bring medical innovation to our community." In the days that followed, the full scope of the conspiracy unraveled. The pharmaceutical company Hargrove had secretly invested and had tested experimental combat stimulants on homeless veterans and addicts, promising them treatment but delivering untested compounds that caused fatal neurological damage. When subjects died, their bodies were buried in unmarked graves, their identities erased from records. 3 weeks after the hospital confrontation, Martin stood beside Mrs. Carson in the cemetery. Workers carefully exhumed the remains from the unmarked grave she had visited for so many years. DNA confirmed it, Martin said gently. It's him. It's Michael. Mrs. Carson nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face. All these years, I somehow knew. A mother knows. The proper headstone arrived the following week. Michael Carson, it read, along with his birth and death dates. Below the inscription, beloved son, stolen too soon. Justice, however, proved messier than Martin had hoped. Senator Hargrove's connections ran deep. While Blackwood resigned in disgrace and several pharmaceutical executives faced charges, Hargrove's legal team negotiated a deal. He would resign from the Senate, pay substantial restitution to victims' families, and serve only minimal house arrest due to his advanced age and health concerns. It's not enough, Callahan raged when the news broke. He and Martin sat at their usual table in the diner, the newspaper spread between them. After what he did, he'll still die in luxury. But he'll die in disgrace, Martin replied. His legacy is destroyed. The Hargrove wing at the hospital is being renamed. His foundation is dissolved. The truth is known. On a crisp autumn morning, Martin watched as Mrs. Carson approached Michael's grave. This time, she wasn't alone. 5 other families had come forward, identifying their lost sons among the unnamed dead. They stood together now, a small community forged in grief and vindication. Mrs. Carson placed not a toy soldier, but fresh flowers on Michael's grave. She straightened, her face peaceful in a way Martin hadn't seen before. Some justice is better than none, she said when Martin approached. Michael can rest now. And so can I. Martin nodded, thinking of the other unmarked graves still waiting throughout the cemetery. Other secrets yet to be unearthed. The powerful rarely paid the full price for their sins, but sometimes, just sometimes, the truth found its way to the surface, like persistent roots breaking through the soil toward the light. The cemetery felt different now. As Martin made his rounds, trimming grass and clearing debris, he noticed how the once forgotten corner had transformed. Fresh flowers adorned Michael Carson's grave, and 5 others now bore proper headstones, names restored to those who had been erased. 6 months had passed since the scandal broke. Martin's testimony had made him something of a local hero, though he shunned the attention. He preferred the quiet company of the dead and the satisfaction of knowing he'd helped set things right. His routine had changed. Every Thursday, Mrs. Carson brought coffee for them both. They'd sit on the bench near Michael's grave, sometimes talking, sometimes sharing comfortable silence. Other families visited regularly too, nodding respectfully as Martin worked nearby. You've given us peace, Mrs. Carson had told him last week. That's worth more than any justice system could provide. Today, as Martin raked leaves near the eastern fence, he noticed something unusual, a small wooden box placed beside a weathered headstone from the 1940s. He approached cautiously, examining the intricate carvings on its surface, strange symbols he didn't recognize. Inside lay a faded photograph of a young woman and a handwritten note. Find her. She knows what happened to the others. Martin's breath caught. The handwriting matched that on the anonymous tip that had started his investigation into the unmarked graves. Someone was watching. Someone knew there were more secrets buried here. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you enjoyed this mysterious tale. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think is in that wooden box?